Maybe you should eat upstairs. My daughter-in-law, Harper, told me. She stood in the doorway of my kitchen, dressed in a sleek velvet dress, holding a glass of wine. I had been up since 5 preparing the Christmas turkey. My hands dusted with flour, the heat of the oven warming my face. The house smelled of roasted sage, butter, and cinnamon the exact way it had smelled every December for the last 30 years. Harper looked at my faded apron and the oven mitts resting on the counter. She did not ask. She suggested it with that smooth, controlling tone she used whenever she wanted something inconvenient to disappear. We didn't really plan this dinner as your kind of thing. Deborah, she added, smiling thinly. My friends are here. It's a younger crowd. You'd probably be more comfortable in your room watching television. My son, Liam, stood just behind her in the hallway. He looked at the floor, suddenly fascinated by the hardwood planks he had grown up walking on. He didn't say a word. He rarely did these days. I was 64 years old. My name was the only one on the deed to this 4-bedroom house in the Ohio suburbs. I paid the property taxes, the heating bill, and the grocery tab. Yet, here I was, being dismissed from my own dining room like hired help whose shift had ended. If you had told me 8 months ago that my life would shrink to this exact moment, I would have laughed. I am not a fragile woman. When my husband passed away 5 years ago, I didn't crumble. I learned how to clean the gutters, manage the retirement accounts, and keep my life moving forward. But 8 months ago, Liam called me. He said their apartment rent was climbing, and they needed a place to stay while they saved for a down payment on a house of their own. I agreed. That was my first mistake. I didn't argue with Harper standing there in the doorway. I didn't cry. I didn't tell her how much my feet ached from standing on the tile all day. Instead, I untied the strings of my apron and folded it neatly on the counter. Something shifted inside me. A cold, clear realization that my patience had been mistaken for weakness. The erosion of my household had not happened overnight. It started in small, almost invisible ways, just weeks after Liam and Harper moved into the guest bedroom. I noticed the changes on a Tuesday in late April. I came down to the kitchen to brew my morning coffee and found my heavy espresso machine pushed into a dark corner. In its place stood Harper's sleek, digital cold brew maker. I didn't raise my voice. I simply unplugged her machine, set it carefully inside the pantry, and moved my espresso maker back to its rightful spot. When Harper came downstairs an hour later, she paused by the counter. "Oh," she murmured, her eyebrows raised. "I thought we could modernize the coffee station. It looked a little cluttered." "I like it where it is," I replied, pouring my cup. I didn't offer an apology. By June, she tried to claim the living room. I returned from a grocery run to find my oak coffee table, a piece my late husband and I bought at an antique fair, shoved into the garage. Harper had replaced it with a glass and metal cube that looked like it belonged in a dentist's waiting room. It opens up the space, doesn't it? Harper grinned. Sitting on my sofa, Liam sat next to her, nodding vaguely. I didn't debate the aesthetics. I set my grocery bags down, walked into the garage, and grabbed one end of the oak table. "Liam," I called out. "Come help me carry this back inside. The glass cube can go in your bedroom if you like it so much." Liam blinked, caught off guard. "Mom." Harper just thought, "Now." "Liam," I interrupted, my voice flat and completely devoid of anger. He scrambled up and helped me carry it back. Harper sat in tense silence, her jaw tight. She didn't try to move the furniture again, but the atmosphere in the house grew brittle. They were treating my home like a rental property, and they viewed me as the annoying landlord who refused to die or move to Florida. I watched them closely. I realized Liam was avoiding conflict at all costs, letting Harper steer our daily lives. I refused to be a passenger in my own home. By August, the financial boundaries began to blur. When they first moved in, Liam promised they would cover their own groceries and pay a portion of the utility bills. For the first 2 months, an envelope of cash sat on the kitchen counter on the first of the month. By the third month, the envelope disappeared. One evening, I found Liam standing by the refrigerator, looking stressed. "Mom, things are a little tight right now," he muttered, scratching the back of his neck. Harper bought some new equipment for her freelance business, and we're trying to hit our savings goal. Do you mind covering the electricity and water for a while? You have your pension. Right. I closed the book I was reading and looked at my son. He was 32, healthy, and fully employed. I can cover my utilities. Liam, but I won't cover yours. I stated, but it's the same house. Harper chimed in, stepping out of the hallway. The lights are on anyway. It's not like it costs you that much extra. Actually, it does, I replied, picking up the latest electric bill from the side table. The air conditioning has been running 10 degrees cooler since you moved in, and your daily baths have doubled the water bill. I expect your share by Friday. Harper crossed her arms, her face flushing. We're trying to build a future. Deborah, families are supposed to help each other. I gave you a roof. I answered, standing up. I am not your bank. The next day, I noticed Harper had ordered premium groceries, organic steaks, imported cheeses, and expensive sparkling waters and put them on the supermarket delivery tab linked to my credit card. I didn't yell. I walked to my computer, logged into my bank account, and canceled that card. I requested a new one with a different number. When the next grocery delivery failed, Harper came into the living room, fuming. The card declined. She snapped. I know, I said, turning the page of my book. I canceled it. You'll need to use your own card from now on. She stared at me, realizing the free ride was officially over. The tension simmered through the autumn. Since I had cut off their access to my finances, Harper began trying to dominate the physical space instead. My late husband had a small study on the ground floor. It held his old oak desk, his books, and my sewing machine. It was a quiet room, filled with afternoon light, where I went to read or handle my paperwork. One afternoon in November, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find the study door wide open. Harper was dragging a heavy box of camera equipment across the rug. My husband's desk had been pushed against the wall, and my sewing machine was sitting in the hallway. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Harper didn't even look up. I need a dedicated space for my video calls. The lighting in our bedroom is terrible. I figured since nobody really uses this room, it makes a perfect home office for me. I use this room. I corrected her. You just read in here. She scoffed. You can read in the living room. I actually have a career to manage. I looked at my sewing machine sitting on the floor. I didn't argue. I didn't explain the sentimental value of the room. I simply walked over to the box of camera equipment, picked it up, and set it firmly in the hallway next to my sewing machine. "Hey!" Harper shouted. "Get your things out of my study!" I commanded. "You have 10 minutes. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in my eyes stopped her. She grabbed her boxes and stomped upstairs. slamming her bedroom door. I didn't leave things to chance. That afternoon, I drove to the local hardware store and bought a new doorknob with a heavy-duty lock. I spent 30 minutes installing it myself. When I finished, I pulled the door shut, heard the satisfying click, and slipped the only key onto my keychain. When Liam came home, Harper complained loudly. Liam knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom, did you lock the study?" he asked wearily. "Yes," I answered. "Harper needs a workspace." "Harper can work at the dining table," I replied. "Good night." Liam. December arrived, bringing a thick blanket of snow and an even thicker layer of resentment inside the house. For 30 years, I had hosted Christmas dinner. It was a quiet, intimate tradition. But 2 weeks before the holiday, Harper cornered me in the kitchen. "I've invited some people for Christmas," she announced, pouring herself a glass of water. "My parents, my sister, and about 6 of our friends from the city. We're going to do a proper dinner. You invited 10 people to my house without asking." I questioned, wiping down the counter. "We live here too," she replied sharply. "And I want to celebrate with my network. I emailed you a menu. Some of my friends are vegan, and my sister is doing a keto diet, so you'll need to adjust the recipes." She was treating me like a private chef. She expected me to fund the dinner, cook the food, and cater to her guests while she played the gracious host. "I see," I said. I didn't tell her no. I didn't start a screaming match. I simply walked over to my tablet, opened the email she had sent, and deleted it. Over the next 2 weeks, Harper ordered table linens and centerpieces, having them shipped to the house. She talked loudly on her phone about the fabulous dinner party she was throwing. Liam stayed out of the way, working late and hiding in their bedroom whenever he was home. I did my own preparations. I went to the butcher and ordered my usual small turkey. I bought the ingredients for my traditional sage stuffing, cranberry sauce, and pecan pie. I did not buy tofu. I did not buy keto-friendly flour. I bought exactly what I wanted, using my own money. I also took a trip to a local storage facility. I rented a small unit and quietly moved a few boxes of my most precious valuables jewelry, important family documents, and photo albums out of the house. I was preparing my boundaries, and I was making sure my foundation was completely secure before the storm hit. Christmas morning began at dawn. The house was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the hallway clock. I tied my faded holly print apron around my waist and went to work. I moved with the muscle memory of 3 decades, peeling potatoes, mixing the stuffing, and basting the turkey. By noon, the windows were fogged with heat, and the rich, savory smell of roasting meat filled every corner of the house. Around 1 o'clock, Harper came downstairs. She was wearing a silk robe, a sheet mask on her face. She looked at the stove, then at the counter. "Where are the stuffed mushrooms?" she demanded, peeling the mask off. "And the vegan roast. I didn't make them," I answered, sliding a pie into the bottom oven. She stared at me, her face turning pale. "What do you mean you didn't make them? I gave you the list 2 weeks ago. My friends arrive at 5. I am making the dinner I always make," I replied calmly, washing my hands at the sink. "If your friends require something else, I suggest you start cooking." "I don't have time to cook. I have to get ready," she shouted, her voice shrill. Liam scurried into the kitchen, his eyes wide. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your mother is ruining Christmas," Harper hissed, grabbing her phone. She'd frantically began searching for open delivery restaurants. But it was Christmas Day. Nothing was open. I wiped my hands on a towel and poured myself a cup of tea. I watched them panic with a quiet, detached sense of peace. I had spent months bending backward to accommodate them, only to be pushed further into the corners of my own life. Today, I was standing firm in the center of it. The turkey will be ready at 5. I told Liam, "You are welcome to eat it, or not." I took my tea and walked into the living room, leaving them to their chaos. By 5:30 p.m., Harper's guests had arrived. They were loud, carrying expensive bottles of wine, treating the house like a rented event venue. I stayed in the kitchen, finishing the gravy. I arranged the sliced turkey on my best silver platter. I carried the bowls of stuffing and potatoes into the dining room and set them on the table. That was when Harper walked in, looked at my apron, and told me I should eat upstairs. The dining room was buzzing with the chatter of her friends in the adjacent living room. Liam stood silently nearby. Harper wanted me out of sight, an embarrassing relic she didn't want to explain to her stylish friends. I looked at her velvet dress. I looked at my son, who couldn't even meet my eyes. I untied my apron. I folded it. I placed it on the side buffet. I didn't retreat to the stairs. Instead, I walked straight to the dining table. I pulled out the large armchair at the head of the table, the chair that belonged to me, and I sat down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the spare set of car keys Liam used for my sedan. I set them on the table. Next, I pulled out the Wi-Fi router that controlled the internet for the second floor. I set it next to the keys. Harper's friends began filtering into the dining room, laughing. But they froze when they saw me sitting there. The room fell entirely silent. I smiled warmly at the guests. "Please, sit down," I offered, gesturing to the remaining chairs. "I hope you enjoy the meal I prepared." Harper's face was dark red. "Deborah, what are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. I looked directly at her, my voice clear and carrying across the quiet room. "I am eating in my own house." "Harper," I stated. I turned to my son. "Liam, you and your wife have exactly 30 days to find a new place to live. You need to be completely moved out by January 25th. If you aren't, the locks will be changed." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I picked up the serving spoon, scooped a generous portion of stuffing onto my plate, and smiled at Harper's sister. "Would you pass the butter? Please." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack the floorboards. Harper's guests awkwardly took their seats, exchanging panicked glances. Harper sat rigidly at the opposite end of the table, staring at her empty plate. Liam sat beside her, looking like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. I ate my dinner with genuine enjoyment. The turkey was perfectly moist, the gravy rich and deeply flavored. I did not let the awkwardness ruin my meal. I had reclaimed my territory, and the food tasted like victory. "So," I said, turning to one of Harper's friends, a young man in a sharp blazer. "Harper tells me you work in marketing. How is the industry these days?" He stammered, picking up his fork with trembling fingers. It's good. Very busy." "That's wonderful." I smiled. I directed the conversation effortlessly. I asked polite questions, complimented the wine they brought, and made sure everyone was served. I played the perfect, gracious host, which only highlighted Harper's absolute humiliation. She had tried to banish me, and instead, I had publicly taken back all my power. When the meal ended, The guests left incredibly early, mumbling rapid excuses about the snow and early mornings. The moment the front door clicked shut, Liam turned to me, his face pale. "Mom, you embarrassed us in front of everyone," he pleaded. "You didn't have to do it like that." I stood up and began clearing my plates. "I didn't embarrass you, Liam," I answered, scraping a plate into the trash. "Your wife tried to banish me to my bedroom in the house I own, and you stood there and let her. You embarrassed yourselves." "We're trying to save money," Harper yelled, finally finding her voice. "Where are we supposed to go in 30 days? That is your problem to solve," I replied calmly. I picked up the Wi-Fi router and the spare car keys from the table. "Now, excuse me. I have dishes to wash." The next morning, the house felt different. The dynamic had snapped, and there was no repairing it. I didn't remind them of the deadline. I didn't need to. I simply stopped providing the invisible safety net they had been resting on for 8 months. When they woke up, the internet was gone. I had called the provider, canceled the house-wide plan, and set up a private, password-protected hotspot just for my phone and tablet. Harper, who relied on the Wi-Fi for her freelance work, threw a fit in the hallway. "I can't send my files," she screamed. "The coffee shop down the street has free internet," I suggested casually as I walked past her with a basket of my laundry. I washed only my clothes. I cooked meals only for myself, in portions too small to share. When I finished watching television in the evening, I took the remote control to my bedroom and locked the door. I made living in my house incredibly inconvenient. By the second week of January, reality set in for Liam. Without my car to use, he had to take the bus to work in the freezing cold. Without my groceries, they were eating expensive takeout they couldn't afford. One evening, Liam knocked on my door. He looked exhausted. "Mom, please, just give us a few more months. We found a place, but the deposit is huge." I looked at the boy I had raised, the one who used to be so considerate before he let someone else rewrite his character. "I love you, Liam," I said firmly. "But you are a grown man. You let disrespect flourish under my roof. You leave on the 25th. I closed the door. 2 days later, I saw them bringing empty cardboard boxes into the house. They had finally realized I was not bluffing. I was not negotiating, and I was not going to save them. They moved out on a Tuesday afternoon. The weather was bitter cold, the sky a flat, pale gray. I stood by the kitchen window, holding a hot cup of tea, watching Liam and a hired mover load their boxes into a rented truck. Harper sat in the passenger seat of their only car, staring straight ahead. She didn't come back inside to say goodbye. Liam came into the kitchen one last time. He handed me the house keys. He looked around the room, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry, Mom," he muttered. "Things just got out of hand." I took the keys and put them in my pocket. They did. "Take care of yourself, Liam. Call me when you get settled." He nodded, hugged me briefly, and walked out the door. I listened to the truck engine start. I watched them drive down the snowy street until they turned the corner and disappeared from sight. The silence that settled over the house was immediate. It was not a lonely silence. It was a deep, restorative quiet. The air felt lighter. I didn't sit down and cry. I walked to the front door and engaged the deadbolt. Then, I pulled out my phone and called the local locksmith. I had them out within the hour to rekey the front, back, and garage doors. It wasn't out of fear. It was simply a practical necessity. A closing of the chapter. When the locksmith left, I walked into the living room. I moved the heavy oak coffee table exactly to the center of the rug, perfectly aligned with the sofa. I went into the kitchen, made a fresh cup of espresso using my own machine, and walked into my study. I sat at my husband's desk, looking out at the snow-covered yard. My boundaries were intact. My home was my own again. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute peace of a space that belonged only to me.